They told me it was punishment, but looking back now, I realize it was salvation in disguise. My name is Garrett Wyndham, and at 28 years old I had already managed to destroy everything that once mattered to me. Third son of a minor lord, educated enough to know better, yet foolish enough to gamble away what little honor my family name still carried. The morning they shackled my wrists, and told me I would escort some bastard girl to an abbey, I thought my life had reached its lowest point. I was wrong about many things back then, but mostly, I was wrong about her. The grey October drizzle hadn't stopped for 3 days when they brought me from the dungeon to the courtyard of Windsor Castle. My boots squelched through puddles that reflected the pewter sky, and I could taste the dampness in every breath. The guards flanking me said nothing, but their silence spoke volumes about what they thought of a man who had fallen so far from grace. 6 months earlier, I had been a respected member of the Queen's Guard. Now, I was little more than a prisoner being given one last chance to prove I wasn't completely worthless. The scandal that brought me down still burned in my chest like a physical wound. My mother had been dying slowly, consumed by a wasting sickness that no physician could name. Every coin I could scrape together went to buying her medicines, better food, warmer blankets. When my soldier's pay wasn't enough, I turned to dice games and card tables, telling myself it was temporary, that one good night would solve everything. The debts piled higher than I could climb, and soon I was taking money from wherever I could find it, including funds meant for the guard's equipment. The night raiders struck the outer villages, I was supposed to be at my post on the eastern tower. Instead, I was in a tavern, drunk on cheap ale and desperation, trying to win back what I had already lost twice over. 3 people died in that raid because the warning bells rang too late. My mother passed away 2 weeks later, never knowing that her son had become exactly the kind of man she had raised me not to be. The shame of it still pressed against my ribs like broken glass every time I drew breath. Standing in that courtyard, water dripping from my unkempt hair, I expected to meet some common-born girl who had been unfortunate enough to catch royal attention. The illegitimate children of nobles were often shuffled away to convents and monasteries when they became inconvenient, and I assumed this would be no different. A simple escort job to some remote abbey, a chance to prove I could still follow orders without destroying everything around me. Easy enough for a man with nothing left to lose. Then she appeared in the doorway of the great hall, and everything I thought I knew about my situation crumbled like old parchment. She moved with a grace that seemed to flow from her bones rather than any learned behavior. Even beneath the simple traveling cloak, there was something about her bearing that spoke of nobility, but not the practiced artifice of court ladies. This was different, deeper, like she had been born knowing secrets the rest of us spent lifetimes trying to understand. Her dark hair was braided simply, without jewels or ornaments, yet it caught what little light filtered through the gray morning as if it were spun from shadows and starlight. When she lifted her eyes to meet mine across the courtyard, I felt something shift inside my chest, a recognition I couldn't name. She was perhaps 23, with features that belonged in paintings of saints or queens. But it was her eyes that held me frozen in place. Dark as forest pools, they carried a sadness that seemed older than her years, yet underneath that sorrow burned an intelligence that made me suddenly aware of how rough and unworthy I must appear. For a moment, neither of us moved, and in that suspended instant, I felt as though she could see straight through to all the broken places inside me. Captain Morrison stepped forward, his voice cutting through the morning mist like a blade. He looked at me with the expression of a man disposing of spoiled meat. "Wyndham, you will escort Lady Lyanna to St. Agatha's Abbey in the Northern Territories. The journey will take 8 days if the weather holds, longer if it doesn't. You will speak to her only when necessary, ensure her safety at all costs, and deliver her intact to the Mother Superior. Fail in this task, and you'll find the dungeon was a comfortable alternative to what awaits you. Lady Lyanna." Even her name seemed to carry music in it, though something about the way the captain spoke it made me wonder if it was truly hers or simply what they chose to call her. She stepped forward then, her boots making no sound on the wet stones, and curtsied with a precision that spoke of careful training. But when she straightened and spoke, her voice held warmth that no amount of formal education could teach. "I am ready, Captain Morrison," she said, then turned those remarkable eyes to me. "Sir Garrett, I am grateful for your protection on this journey." The fact that she called me sir when I had been stripped of all such honors should have stung, but instead it felt like an unexpected kindness. I managed a bow that was probably too stiff, too formal for a disgraced guard, but something about her made me want to remember what courtesy felt like. "My lady," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I will see you safely to the Abbey." As the stable boys brought our horses, I found myself stealing glances at her, trying to understand what it was about this woman that made the very air seem different when she was near. She moved to her horse, a gentle mare the color of autumn leaves, and I watched as she whispered something in the animal's ear that made it calm instantly. There was something almost magical about the gesture, though I pushed such fanciful thoughts away. I had learned the hard way that believing in magic only led to disappointment. The captain handed me a sealed letter, his fingers lingering on the parchment as if reluctant to let it go. "The Mother Superior will be expecting you. Do not break that seal, Wyndham. Do not read what's inside. Your job is to deliver it along with the girl, nothing more." I tucked the letter inside my coat, next to my heart, where it immediately felt heavier than it should have. Whatever secrets it contained, they were clearly important enough to trust to a man who had already proven himself unreliable. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I had learned not to question orders, especially when they might be my last chance at redemption. As we prepared to leave Windsor Castle behind, Lady Lyanna pulled her hood up against the persistent drizzle, but not before I caught one more glimpse of those extraordinary eyes. In them, I saw something that surprised me more than anything else that strange morning. I saw hope. How a woman being sent away to a convent could maintain such hope was beyond my understanding, but it sparked something in me that I had thought was dead and buried with my mother. What I didn't know then, as we rode out through the castle gates into the grey October morning, was that this journey would change everything I believed about honor, love, and the possibility of second chances. I thought I was escorting just another inconvenient bastard to be hidden away from royal sight. I had no idea I was about to discover that some women are worth dying for, and that sometimes salvation comes disguised as punishment, wearing a traveling cloak and carrying secrets that could reshape kingdoms. The first day of our journey passed in careful silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of hooves on muddy roads and the occasional comment about direction or rest stops. Lady Lyanna rode with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to long distances, never once complaining about the persistent drizzle or the rough country paths we were forced to take. I had chosen the less traveled routes deliberately, something about this assignment making me cautious in ways I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't until we stopped for the night at a small inn that served more ale than food that she first spoke to me as something other than a formal escort. I was checking our horses in the stable, running my hands along their legs to ensure they hadn't picked up any stones, when I heard her soft footsteps behind me. The stable smelled of hay and leather, warm animal breath creating small clouds in the cold October air. "You handle them well," she said, and I turned to find her watching me work. She had pushed back her hood, and in the golden lamplight, her hair seemed to hold depths I hadn't noticed before. "Most guards treat horses like tools rather than companions." I paused, my hand still resting on my mount's neck. The compliment surprised me, partly because it was true and partly because no one had bothered to notice such things about me in months. "My father always said a man who doesn't understand his horse doesn't understand much about living," I replied, then immediately wondered if sharing such personal information was appropriate. She smiled then, the first genuine smile I had seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. The careful composure fell away, revealing something warmer and more human underneath. "He sounds like a wise man. Tell me, what else did he teach you?" Something in her tone invited confidence, and before I could stop myself, I found words spilling out that I hadn't spoken to anyone in years. "That honor isn't something you're born with, but something you build one choice at a time. That a man's word should be worth more than his gold. That protecting those who cannot protect themselves is the highest calling any person can answer." I stopped abruptly, realizing how hollow those words must sound coming from someone who had failed so spectacularly at living by them. But instead of the mockery or pity I expected, she nodded thoughtfully. "Those are hard lessons to live by, especially when the world seems determined to punish you for trying." The understanding in her voice caught me off guard. Here was a woman who should have lived a sheltered life, protected from the harsh realities that had broken me, yet she spoke as if she knew exactly what it meant to fail at being the person you were raised to be. I studied her face in the lamplight, searching for clues about who she really was beneath the careful courtesy. "What about you, my lady?" I asked, surprised by my own boldness. "What did your father teach you?" Her expression shifted, becoming more guarded, and for a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that seemed too heavy for someone so young. "He taught me that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones who hurt you most. And that survival often depends on becoming invisible, even when you desperately want to be seen." The pain in those words hit me like a physical blow. Whatever her story was, it wasn't the simple tale of an inconvenient bastard being shuffled away. There was real hurt here, deep and carefully hidden, and suddenly I understood why her eyes carried that older sadness. We stood there in the stable, two broken people pretending to be whole, and for the first time since my mother's death, I didn't feel completely alone. The moment might have stretched longer, but the sound of horses approaching at speed shattered the peace between us. I grabbed her arm, perhaps more roughly than necessary, and pulled her deeper into the shadows of the stable. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, I could see 3 riders dismounting in the inn's courtyard, their faces hard and purposeful in the torchlight. "Do you recognize them?" I whispered, but when I looked at her face, I already knew the answer. She had gone pale as winter frost, her breathing quick and shallow. "We need to leave," she said, her voice barely audible. "Now. Tonight." "Who are they?" She shook her head, but I could see the fear in her eyes, real and immediate. "People who would prefer that I never reach the Abbey. Please, Sir Garrett, if you have any honor left, you'll help me disappear before they realize we're here." The desperate plea in her voice decided me. Whatever game was being played here, whatever political maneuvering had put her in danger, I couldn't stand by and watch someone defenseless be hunted. It was exactly the kind of choice my father had taught me to make, the kind I had failed to make when it mattered most. Perhaps this was my chance to finally prove that some part of the man I used to be still existed. Moving quietly, I saddled our horses while she gathered her few belongings. The riders were inside the inn now, their voices carrying through the night air as they questioned the innkeeper. We had minutes at most before they thought to check the stables. I led our mounts out through the back entrance, keeping to the shadows, my heart pounding with the familiar rush of danger that I had almost forgotten I could feel. We rode hard through the darkness, following deer paths and old cart tracks that would be impossible to follow without daylight. Lady Liana never complained about the punishing pace or the branches that caught at our clothes. She rode like someone who understood that silence might mean the difference between life and death, and I found myself respecting her composure even as I wondered what kind of life had taught her such skills. When we finally stopped to rest near dawn, hidden in a grove of ancient oaks whose thick trunks would shelter us from view, she turned to me with an expression of gratitude so profound it made my chest tight. "Thank you," she said simply. "I know you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Whatever my failures, I'm still sworn to protect you. That oath means something, even if I've forgotten what honor feels like." She studied my face in the growing light, and I had the unsettling feeling that she could see things I had tried to hide even from myself. "What happened to you, Garrett? What broke you so badly that you believe you have no honor left?" The question should have made me angry or defensive, but her tone held only genuine curiosity, and something that might have been compassion. Perhaps it was the exhaustion, or the strange intimacy of our shared danger, but I found myself telling her everything. About my mother's illness, about the gambling, about the night I chose my own desperation over my duty and 3 people died because of it. About the crushing weight of knowing that I had become exactly the kind of man I had always despised. She listened without judgment, never interrupting, her dark eyes reflecting an understanding that went deeper than mere sympathy. When I finished, we sat in silence for a long moment, watching the first rays of sunlight filter through the autumn leaves above us. "Guilt is a luxury," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "It feels noble to carry it around, like it proves we're good people who simply made bad choices. But real honor isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about what you do after you make them." Her words hit me with the force of revelation, cutting through months of self-pity and reaching something buried deep inside me. Here was this woman, fleeing unknown enemies in the night, offering wisdom to a man who had given her every reason to despise him. In that moment, sitting beneath those ancient trees with the dawn breaking around us, I felt something shift inside my chest, like a door I had welded shut beginning to creak open. What I didn't know then, as we prepared to continue our journey into an uncertain day, was that the riders pursuing us were only the beginning of our troubles, and that the woman beside me carried secrets that would make my own disgrace seem like a child's misdeed. But I was starting to understand that some chances at redemption come disguised as impossible situations, and that sometimes the people we're meant to protect end up saving us instead. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of back roads and careful vigilance. We avoided main thoroughfares entirely, sleeping rough under oak trees and in abandoned shepherds' huts, always listening for the sound of pursuit that never seemed far behind. Lady Liana proved herself remarkably resilient, never once suggesting we should take easier paths or seek more comfortable lodging. She seemed to understand instinctively that our lives might depend on staying invisible. It was during those nights, huddled around small fires that we dared light only in the deepest hollows, that I began to truly know her. She spoke little about her past, but what she did reveal painted a picture of a life lived in shadows and uncertainty. She had been raised by a woman she called Aunt Margaret, though she admitted with a slight smile that they shared no blood. Her education had been thorough but secretive, conducted in a manor house far from court, where she learned languages and letters alongside the more practical skills of managing an estate. "Were you happy there?" I asked one evening as we shared our meager supper of bread and dried meat. She considered the question for a long moment, poking at our fire with a stick. "I was safe," she said finally. "For a long time, I thought that was the same thing as happiness. It wasn't until recently that I realized how much I had given up for that safety." There was something in her voice, a longing that made me want to ask what she had given up, but the sound of breaking branches in the distance cut our conversation short. We doused the fire immediately and spent the night pressed against the cold earth beneath a fallen log, listening to riders pass dangerously close to our hiding place. In the darkness, I could feel her trembling beside me, though whether from cold or fear, I couldn't tell. The morning brought the season's first real frost, turning the world silver and brittle. As we prepared to mount our horses, Lady Liana's cloak caught on a thorny branch, and as I helped free her, our faces came close enough that I could see the delicate patterns frost had made on her eyelashes. For a heartbeat, we stood frozen like that, and I felt something pass between us that had nothing to do with duty or protection. Her lips parted slightly, as if she might speak, but then she stepped back and the moment shattered like ice under boot. "We should make good time today," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "The ground will be hard enough for faster travel." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and we mounted in silence. But something had changed in that frozen moment, something that made me acutely aware of her presence beside me as we rode. The way she sat her horse with unconscious grace. The soft sound of her breathing in the cold air. The fact that despite everything that should have made her bitter or broken, she still found reasons to smile at small things, like the way morning sunlight caught in spiderwebs or the sight of deer bounding through distant fields. That afternoon, our careful avoidance of main roads finally caught up with us. The path we were following ended abruptly at a river swollen with autumn rains, its usual ford completely impassable. The nearest bridge was miles out of our way, back toward roads where we might be seen, but the water was too deep and fast to cross safely. "There!" Lady Liana pointed upstream to where an enormous fallen tree stretched most of the way across the torrent. "We could make it across if we're careful." I studied the makeshift bridge, noting how slick with moisture it was, how the current beneath it churned white with dangerous speed. "It's too risky. If you fell. If we go back to find the bridge, they'll catch us," she said simply. "I've seen what they do to people who inconvenience them, Garrett. I'd rather risk the river." The way she said my name, without the formal sir, sent an unexpected warmth through my chest. But her words about what they did to people chilled me in a different way entirely. Just who was pursuing us, and what had Lady Liana done to earn such dedicated enemies? In the end, we had little choice. I went first, leading my horse carefully across the treacherous log, testing each step before putting my full weight down. The bark was indeed slippery with frost and moisture, and more than once I felt my footing slip dangerously. When I reached the far side safely, I turned to watch Lady Liana begin her crossing. She moved with the same careful grace she brought to everything else, her horse stepping delicately behind her. But halfway across, disaster struck. A section of bark gave way beneath her mount's hoof, and the animal stumbled badly, threatening to pitch both horse and rider into the churning water below. Without thinking, I plunged back onto the log, reaching her just as she lost her grip on the reins. My arms went around her waist, pulling her against me as her horse scrambled for purchase on the slippery surface. For a moment we balanced there together, her back pressed against my chest, my face buried in her hair that smelled of wood smoke and something indefinably sweet. I could feel her heart racing against my arm, matching the frantic rhythm of my own. Slowly, carefully, we managed to coax her horse to solid footing, but when we finally reached the far bank, Lady Liana turned in my arms and looked up at me with an expression I couldn't read. Her cheeks were flushed from cold and fear, her lips slightly parted, and suddenly the careful distance we had maintained between us seemed impossible to preserve. "Thank you," she whispered, but she didn't step away, and neither did I. "I told you I would protect you," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "I meant it." Something flickered in her dark eyes, an emotion too complex to name. "Even if you knew who I really was? Even if protecting me meant risking everything you have left?" The question hung between us like a challenge, and I realized that somewhere in the past few days, this woman had become more important to me than my own redemption. Whatever secrets she carried, whatever dangers pursued her, I found that I no longer cared about anything except keeping her safe. Especially then, I said, and meant it with a certainty that surprised us both. That night, we sheltered in the ruins of an old watchtower, its broken walls providing some protection from the wind that had begun to howl with approaching winter. Lady Lyanna had grown quiet since our river crossing, and I could see her wrestling with some internal decision as she stared into our small fire. "There's something you need to know," she said finally, her voice so soft I had to lean closer to hear her. "About who I am. About why those men are hunting us." I waited, sensing that this moment would change everything between us, though I couldn't have guessed how completely. She took a shaking breath, then looked directly into my eyes. "My name isn't really Lady Lyanna Ashcroft. That's just what they've called me since I was old enough to understand that my real name was too dangerous to speak aloud." The firelight flickered across her face as she spoke, casting shadows that made her seem almost ethereal. "My real name is Lyanna Tudor. My father was King Henry VII. My mother was a lady of the court who caught his eye when Queen Elizabeth was with child. I am the bastard daughter of a dead king, and the current queen has decided that I'm too dangerous to live." The words hit me like physical blows, each revelation reshaping everything I thought I knew about our situation. This wasn't just some inconvenient noble bastard being shuffled off to a convent. This was a woman whose very existence posed a threat to the stability of the throne, whose Tudor blood made her a potential rallying point for anyone who questioned Queen Margaret's authority. And I, a disgraced former guard with nothing left to lose, had just sworn to protect her with my life. The irony might have been laughable if the implications weren't so terrifying. Helping her meant treason of the highest order. Being caught with her meant death not just for me, but for anyone who had ever shown me kindness. But as I looked into her eyes, seeing the fear and hope warring there, I realized that my choice had already been made. Somewhere between that first moment in the courtyard and this revelation in the firelight, Lady Lyanna had become more important to me than my own survival. She had reminded me what it felt like to be the man my father had raised me to be. "Then we'd better make sure they don't catch us," I said, and watched relief flood her features like sunrise after the longest night. The revelation of her true identity changed everything and nothing at all. She was still the same woman who had shown me kindness when I deserved none, still the person whose courage had inspired me to remember what honor felt like. But now I understood the weight she carried, the impossible burden of being born into a bloodline that made her existence a political complication. We traveled harder the next day, knowing that our pursuers would be relentless in their hunt for a Tudor bastard. The landscape around us had grown wilder, more desolate, as we moved toward the northern territories where St. Agatha's Abbey waited. The trees were nearly bare now, their skeletal branches reaching toward a sky that seemed perpetually gray with approaching winter. Snow had begun to fall in earnest, not the gentle dusting of early season, but the serious accumulation that spoke of storms to come. "Tell me about the Abbey," I said as we paused to rest our horses near a frozen stream. "What do you know about this Mother Superior we're supposed to meet?" Lady Lyanna, though I found it hard to think of her as anything but Lyanna now that I knew her truth, pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders. "Very little. Only that she's said to be discreet and that the Abbey has a reputation for taking in women who need to disappear from the world. I suspect that's exactly what Queen Margaret intends for me." The bitterness in her voice was new, and it cut me to hear it. "Is that what you want? To disappear?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her words came out in visible puffs of breath in the cold air. "I used to think it was. For years, all I wanted was to be invisible, to stop being a problem that needed solving. But these past few days with you have reminded me that there might be other ways to live." The implication in her words made my heart race in ways that had nothing to do with our dangerous circumstances. I wanted to ask what she meant, wanted to understand if the connection I felt growing between us was something she shared, but the sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the winter silence like a blade. This time, there was nowhere to hide. We were caught in open country, with snow beginning to fall heavily enough to limit visibility but not enough to obscure our tracks. I counted at least 6 riders cresting the hill behind us, moving with the purposeful determination of men who had finally cornered their prey. "Ride," I told Lyanna, drawing my sword even as I knew it was hopeless. "Get to the Abbey. Don't look back." But she shook her head, her eyes blazing with a defiance I had never seen before. "No. We face this together, or not at all." "You don't understand," I said desperately. If they take you, you'll disappear forever. If they take me, I'm just a disgraced guard who failed in his duty. You're worth 100 of me." She reached out then and touched my face with her gloved hand, the gesture so tender it stopped my protests cold. "You're wrong, Garrett Wyndham. You're worth everything to me." The simple declaration hit me with more force than any physical blow could have. In that moment, with enemies bearing down on us and snow beginning to blur the world around us, I realized that somewhere in our journey together I had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with this woman. Not just with her beauty or her courage, but with the way she had seen something worthwhile in me when I couldn't see it myself. The riders were close enough now that I could see their faces, hard men with the look of professional soldiers rather than common brigands. Their leader raised his hand, signaling the others to slow their approach. He was a man of middle years with gray streaking his beard and scars that spoke of many battles survived. "Lady Lyanna Tudor," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the snowy field. "By order of Her Majesty Queen Margaret, you will come with us. Surrender peacefully, and no harm will come to your escort." I moved my horse closer to Lyanna's, positioning myself between her and the approaching men. "She's under my protection," I called back, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Any man who wants her will have to go through me first." The leader laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "One broken-down guard against 6 of the Queen's best? Stand aside, Wyndham. This doesn't have to end with your death." But even as he spoke, I could see in his eyes that he had no intention of letting either of us leave this field alive. Whatever orders he carried, they didn't include bringing Lyanna back to face trial or imprisonment. Dead women told no tales and posed no future threats to the crown. "I have a better idea," Lyanna said suddenly, her voice carrying an authority that made even the hardened soldiers pause. "I challenge your right to take me under the ancient laws of sanctuary. I am within 2 miles of consecrated ground, and I claim protection under God's law until I can reach the Abbey." The leader's face darkened. "There is no such law. Isn't there?" Lyanna's smile was sharp as winter wind. "Are you willing to bet your soul on that, Captain? Are you willing to explain to your men why you ordered them to spill blood so close to holy ground?" I watched uncertainty flicker across the faces of several soldiers. Medieval superstitions died hard, even among professional killers, and the idea of divine retribution for violating sanctuary was not something any man took lightly. But their leader was made of sterner stuff. "Pretty words won't save you, girl. Last chance, Wyndham. Step aside." Instead, I spurred my horse forward, sword raised, knowing that this was where my story would likely end. But if I was going to die, at least it would be as the man my father had tried to raise me to be. At least Lyanna would know that someone had thought her worth dying for. The clash when it came was brief and brutal. My sword met the leader's with a ring that echoed across the snowy field, and for a moment we were locked together, our horses dancing beneath us as we struggled for advantage. I managed to land one solid blow across his sword arm before another rider's blade caught me across the ribs, sending fire racing through my side. But as I fought, something extraordinary happened. The falling snow began to thicken dramatically, changing from gentle flakes to a driving blizzard that reduced visibility to mere feet. The wind picked up with supernatural swiftness, howling across the field like the voices of angry spirits. Within minutes, the world had become a wall of white that made it impossible to see friend from foe. In the chaos of the sudden storm, I felt Lyanna's hand grab my arm. "This way," she shouted over the wind, and somehow she led us through the blinding snow with a certainty that seemed impossible. Behind us, I could hear the soldiers calling to each other, their voices growing more distant as we moved away from the battle site. We rode blindly through the storm for what felt like hours, trusting entirely to Lyanna's navigation and our horses' instincts. When the snow finally began to thin, we found ourselves in a narrow valley I didn't recognize, with stone walls rising on either side like the entrance to another world. And there, barely visible through the last wisps of the blizzard, stood the ancient towers of St. Agatha's Abbey. "How did you know?" I asked Lyanna as we approached the gates, my voice hoarse from cold and exhaustion. "How did you find the way through that storm?" She turned to look at me, and in her eyes I saw something that made my breath catch. "Some paths become clear only when you have something worth fighting for," she said softly. "Something worth living for." As the Abbey bells began to toll, calling the sisters to evening prayers, I realized that our journey was far from over. We had reached our destination, but the real question now was what sanctuary we might find here, and whether the feelings growing between us could survive whatever trials still awaited us behind those ancient walls. The heavy wooden gates of St. Agatha's Abbey swung open before we could even announce ourselves, as if the sisters had been watching for our arrival. A tall woman in the simple brown robes of a Benedictine nun stepped forward, her face weathered but kind, her eyes sharp with an intelligence that seemed to take in everything at once. "Lady Lyanna," she said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. "I am Mother Superior Beatrice. We have been expecting you." As we dismounted, I noticed how the Mother Superior's gaze lingered on my wounded side, where blood had soaked through my coat during the fight with the Queen's soldiers. But she said nothing about it, instead gesturing for us to follow her through the gates into the Abbey's courtyard. The ancient stones seemed to exhale peace, as if centuries of prayer had soaked into the very walls. Snow continued to fall gently here, but the howling wind that had saved us seemed unable to penetrate the sacred space. For the first time in days, I felt my shoulders relax slightly, though I kept my hand near my sword hilt out of habit. "Mother Superior," I began, reaching inside my coat for the sealed letter Captain Morrison had given me. "I have instructions from Queen Margaret, yes," she interrupted gently, but made no move to take the letter. "I imagine those instructions involve leaving the young lady here and forgetting you ever met her." The accuracy of her guess surprised me, but before I could respond, Lyanna stepped forward. "Mother Superior, I need you to know that Sir Garrett saved my life multiple times on this journey. Whatever orders you've received, he deserves to know that he fulfilled his duty with honor." The nun studied us both with those penetrating eyes, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see far more than either of us intended to reveal. "Honor is indeed rare in these times," she said finally. "Come, both of you. You'll catch your death standing in this snow, and there are things we need to discuss in private." She led us into the Abbey proper, through corridors lined with simple wooden crosses and lit by candles that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. The silence here was different from the fearful quiet of our journey. This was a peaceful silence, full of contemplation and purpose. We passed several nuns who bowed respectfully but showed no curiosity about our presence, as if mysterious arrivals were commonplace at St. Agatha's. The Mother Superior's private chamber was spartanly furnished but warm, with a fire crackling in the hearth and simple wooden chairs arranged around a plain table. She gestured for us to sit, then poured wine from a clay pitcher into wooden cups, her movements economical and graceful. "Now then," she said, settling into her own chair, "let me tell you what I know, and then you can decide how much truth you're willing to share in return. Lady Lyanna Tudor, bastard daughter of the late King Henry, you've been sent here to disappear quietly while certain political situations resolve themselves. Sir Garrett Wyndham, disgraced former guard, you've been given this assignment as a test of whether you can still follow orders without causing complications." The bluntness of her summary left us both speechless for a moment. Then Lyanna leaned forward, her voice steady despite the shock. "How do you know all this?" The Mother Superior smiled, the expression transforming her austere features. "My dear child, do you think this abbey has survived 3 centuries by being ignorant of the political winds? We sheltered inconvenient daughters and troublesome wives of powerful men since before your grandfather was born. The Church has its own ways of gathering information." She turned those penetrating eyes to me. "The question now is what we do with what we know. Sir Garrett, your orders were to deliver the lady and this letter, then return to Windsor for reassignment. But I suspect recent events have complicated your feelings about those orders." I felt heat rise in my cheeks, wondering just how transparent my emotions had become. "My feelings are irrelevant, Mother Superior. My duty is to follow the Queen's commands." "Is it?" she asked mildly. "Even when those commands involve abandoning someone you've sworn to protect? Even when you know that reassignment likely means a quiet execution to ensure your silence?" The casual way she spoke of my probable death should have shocked me, but instead I felt only a weary acceptance. I had suspected as much myself. Men who knew too much about royal bastards rarely lived to share that knowledge. "What are you suggesting?" Lyanna asked, her voice tight with controlled emotion. The Mother Superior stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered courtyard. "I'm suggesting that sometimes the Church's interests and the Crown's interests don't align perfectly. I'm suggesting that young women with Tudor blood might be more valuable alive than dead, especially if they were to ally themselves with the right people at the right time." She turned back to face us, her expression serious. "There are those who believe Queen Margaret's hold on the throne is not as secure as she pretends. There are whispers of discontent among the nobles, questions about legitimacy and succession. A true Tudor daughter, properly married to the right man, could provide stability to the realm in ways that fear and repression cannot. The implications of her words hit me like cold water. She wasn't talking about hiding Liana away in a convent. She was talking about positioning her as a potential alternative to the current queen. The treasonous nature of such plans should have terrified me, but instead I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. "You're talking about rebellion," I said quietly. "I'm talking about the Church's responsibility to support legitimate authority," she corrected smoothly. "If that authority happens to reside in someone other than the current occupant of the throne, well, God's will works in mysterious ways." Liana had gone very still, her wine cup forgotten in her hands. "And what would be required of me in such a scenario? Marriage to a man who could command loyalty from the nobles. Someone with military experience, proven courage, and most importantly, someone whose honor has been tested and found genuine despite his failures." The Mother Superior's eyes moved meaningfully between us, and suddenly I understood exactly what she was proposing. My heart began to race as the impossible possibility took shape in my mind. "You're suggesting that I marry Sir Garrett," Liana said, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm suggesting that love matches often make the strongest political alliances," the nun replied. "And I'm suggesting that a woman of your bloodline deserves the chance to choose her own fate rather than simply disappear into convenient obscurity." The silence that followed stretched taut as a bowstring. I stared at Liana, hardly daring to breathe, wondering if the feelings I had developed for her could possibly be returned. The idea that I, a disgraced guard with nothing to offer, might actually have a chance at a life with this extraordinary woman seemed too miraculous to believe. "There would be conditions," the Mother Superior continued. "You would need to remain here for a time while arrangements are made. There are allies to contact, plans to set in motion. And Sir Garrett, you would need to prove yourself worthy of such trust through actions, not just intentions." "What kind of actions?" I asked, my voice rough with emotion. "The kind that show the world that honor can be reclaimed, that redemption is possible, and that some things are worth fighting for regardless of the cost." I looked at Liana then, seeing my own hope reflected in her dark eyes. "And if we choose this path? If we decide to trust you and your mysterious allies?" The Mother Superior smiled again, and this time there was genuine warmth in the expression. "Then you'll discover that sometimes punishment becomes salvation, that sometimes the people we're meant to protect end up saving us, and that love truly can conquer all, even the machinations of queens and the weight of royal blood." As the candles flickered in the growing darkness outside, I realized that our journey to the Abbey hadn't been an ending at all, but a beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers we would face, Liana and I would meet them together. In choosing love over duty, honor over safety, we had found something worth more than crowns or titles. We had found each other, and in a world full of political games and deadly ambitions, that was the most precious treasure of all. The snow continued to fall outside the Abbey walls, but inside, warmed by fire and possibility, we began to plan for a future neither of us had dared to imagine when this journey began. Sometimes salvation comes disguised as punishment, and sometimes the most dangerous path leads to the greatest happiness. In Liana's eyes I saw everything I had lost and everything I might yet become, and I knew that whatever came next, I would face it as the man she had helped me remember how to be.